Hi, my name is Gary Bortnick. I was born June 12, 1955 in Washington, D.C. I'm now in Potomac, Maryland in my residence. It's July 22nd, 2022. And I'm going to tell my life story for not only current family, children and grandchildren, but future generations, so they will know something about my life. My parents were Joseph Bortnick and Teresa Epta Bortnick. My dad was born in Washington, D.C. His parents were from Odessa in Ukraine. My mom is from New York City, and her parents were from Eastern Europe. My father was one of 11 children. His father's first wife died in a horse and buggy accident and then remarried, and she was the mother to my father. My mother was one of 4 children, and her father died at an early age. And during the Depression, her mother could not afford to raise all 4 children, so my mom moved to St. Petersburg, Florida to live with relatives for a couple years. As a child, I grew up in North Chevy Chase and went to North Chevy Chase Elementary School and then Kensington Junior High. And my sister Marcia, my brother Alan, my brother Bruce were all older than me. My sister was 12 years older, Alan was 7, and Bruce was 2 years older. So I remember as a child, not too much of my sister being in the house because she was already off to college. But I remember as a child, my brothers sort of pounding on me and using me as their rag doll, so to speak. We were always into sports, and when I lived in North Chevy Chase, where I lived the majority of my life until I was 21, we had a terrific neighborhood, lots of kids. We were always running up the street to play games, football, tag, whatever it was. We were a very close-knit neighborhood, and it was a lot of fun growing up. So as a child growing up, I played a lot of baseball, especially with Bruce. I played for Wheaton Lions. My father's team, or my father's business, sponsored at Square Deal Trucking, so we eventually became Wheaton Lions Square Deal Trucking. And some fond memories, I do hold a record in Montgomery County. When I was 12 years old, I was involved in a double no-hitter. We played at Wheaton Regional Park. I pitched the no-hitter. The other pitcher pitched the no-hitter, but my team won 1-0. Has never been duplicated in Montgomery County to this day. Another incident that took place when I was living on Glenmore Drive was one winter. The snowplow was coming down the road, and back in the day, somebody would stand on the back of the plow and throw sand into the street. Well, I decided, how cool would it be if I could take a snowball and hit the guy? Well, lucky me with my good arm, I hit him in the head. Next thing, he's chasing me down the street into my house. So he chased me down to the house, and he kept knocking on the door, and thank God nobody else was home, and I just would not open that door, and he left. Another funny incident that did not end up well for me was, as kids, we would get a grocery bag and we would fill it with dog poop. And then we would go up the street, and there was one particular neighbor who we didn't like. We would ring his doorbell after we lit the bag on fire. Well, we did that one day. We were not fast enough to get away from the mean neighbor, and he chased us down to the street, and my dad happened to be home, and it wasn't good when our neighbor told my father what we did, and I believe it's the only time my father took a belt to me. And he was mad because he said, "Why did you get caught?" I was born in 1955, but I mostly remember growing up in the 60s. And growing up in the 60s was very different than the year 2022. Growing up in the 60s, we had maybe 3 or 4 TV channels that we would watch. And I vividly remember on Saturday watching a football game at 1 o'clock and a football game at 4 o'clock. And it was always the same teams, USC versus UCLA, Michigan, Ohio State. And it was very simple to put the TV on, which was black and white, and watch those games. Going to the movies in the 60s was very different. There weren't that many movies, but I remember going with my sister Marcia to a movie theater, and it was around Christmas time, and we entered a contest, and I won a 7-foot stocking filled with toys and candy and food, and it was very exciting. And I had to share it with Bruce, my brother Bruce, and my brother Alan, and my sister Marcia, and I still had plenty of food left to eat. Still talking about the 60s, coming home from kindergarten, I remember my lunch was a grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup that my mom made me almost every day. And prices back then were very inexpensive. We went to Little Tavern to get hamburgers. We would get a bag full of hamburgers for $1 or $2. When we took vacations as a family, we went to Ocean City, Maryland. Every summer, we stayed at a hotel, Surf and Sands, and one of my favorite memories was a carryout called Anthony's, and they sliced the roast beef by hand, which is still there today in 2022. Difference is the sandwich, which was $1, is now $10. Being the youngest of 4 on vacations, pretty much I was allowed to do anything and wander around, and we would go on the boardwalk, and ultimately I'd end up in the ocean where my father would have to jump in and pull me out of the ocean. And being the youngest of 4, my parents were very relaxed, and as a child there were certain things that my siblings did that I didn't do. For instance, I didn't study for my bar mitzvah. The cantor came to my house and taught me. I didn't go to Hebrew school. My siblings played musical instruments. I did not play a musical instrument. So there were certain advantages and disadvantages to being the youngest. Also, during elementary school years, I did go to Camp Lupton and Buffalo Gap for a couple years. Camp was never my favorite thing, and that's why I only went a couple of years. Now, when I moved into junior high years, I played on the Kensington Junior High soccer team. I played on the basketball team, and we would go to other schools in the county and play. My best game in basketball was, I believe, 9th grade, and I was not known as a shooter. I wasn't very tall, and so I was a defensive specialist. My dad would always come to all the games, and one of my games, I had 20 points in the first half, and I just could not miss a basket. Second half, I could not make a basket. I could not even hit the backboard. I think I made one foul shot. Didn't matter. I had scored 21 points in the game, and life was good. A little more information about elementary and junior high years. I had a speech impediment. Very difficult time saying an R. And some people would laugh at me, but I used it to my advantage at junior high because I hated gymnastics. And if I had to tumble, I would get dizzy. So many times when it was time to do gymnastics in gym class, I would fudge it, and I would tell them that I was going to my speech lesson, which didn't exist, but I would go to the office and sit there for about a half an hour until I knew my gymnastic class was finished. So I said played a lot of baseball. When I graduated BCC High School, and we had cap and gown to wear, I decided I would take off the cap, put on my baseball hat, attach the tassel to it. While I was in line, the principal saw me and asked me not to wear the baseball hat. My dad was there, and I asked him what he thought. He said, "You're a baseball player, wear it." So I attached the tassel to the hat. I walked across the stage at Shady Grove Music Fair, where we graduated in Gaithersburg, Maryland, and I flipped the tassel, and the principal was not happy with me at all. When I graduated high school in 1973, and I was the youngest of four, my parents said, "Go pick out a car." So I picked out my very first car that I was going to own. It was a blue and white Grand Prix. It was the coolest car ever, and I was the coolest guy on the block. So some jobs I had growing up as a kid was my friend Ricky Schaffness, who was my best friend, lived 5 doors up. We delivered newspapers, and we weren't paid very much. I think we would get $1 for delivering 30 newspapers. This was in junior high. We did it for about 2 weeks, and we became bored, and we decided we weren't making enough money, so we took the newspapers and we threw them in the sewer. Needless to say, we didn't keep that job very long. Another job that Ricky and I did together, during the winter when it would snow, we would shovel sidewalks and driveways. Well, we went to my neighbor when it started snowing one day, and we told her it would be $5. The lesson we learned was, always quote the price after it snows, not when it first starts. It snowed about 10 inches. We went to get paid. She gave us the same $5. Ricky and I decided that wasn't fair, so we took our shovels and we threw all the snow back on her driveway. Another job I would do is I would go in during the summer to my father's trash company. And I would help on some of the trash routes and go with some of his employees to pick up trash. But I thought it was just that my father had the best job in the world, because he had a lot of different trash trucks. And one day the truck came to our house, and we were allowed to climb in the truck, on top of the truck. And I thought, as a 10-year-old, 11-year-old kid, this is the best thing in the world. Climb all over a trash truck and go up and down the street in a trash truck. What would be a better job for somebody's father to have? When I went to college, I went to University of Maryland in College Park in 1973. And the second or third week of school, I met a girl named Debbie Faneroff, who is now my wife of 45 years. And I was torn between being invited to play baseball at the University of Maryland or hang with Debbie. So I only played baseball at Maryland for about a month because it was much more fun to hang out with Debbie. And on our first date, I told Debbie, "I'm going to marry you." And her immediate response was, "Why did you say that? You're an asshole." At University of Maryland, I was a business major. I studied marketing. And most of my days and nights were I was hung around with Debbie, and I was the original Uber driver. Every Friday night, we would go to Debbie's house for Shabbat dinner, and I would be her driver to take her home. And basically, she stayed home over the weekend, and then I'd pick her up, and we would go back to Maryland. Now, during some of these Friday night dinners, Debbie's grandmother, Mimi, lived not too far from me in Chevy Chase, and I would take her home. And repeatedly, she would tell me she knew of my family. She knew of the Bortnicks, or the Butnicks, as she would say. And she would tell me, Friday night after Friday night, "Your grandfather was a bum. All he knew how to do was make babies." Till it finally got to the point that I told Debbie, I can't take her home anymore. I just can't do this. She has to ease up on me. And being the good guy that I was, that never happened. I took Mimi home almost every Friday night. And she was wrong. The Bortnicks are not bums. So during college, Debbie had a number of boyfriends, and I was there. I was on the 8th floor in Cumberland Hall, and Debbie was on the 7th floor. So one by one, I sort of picked off her boyfriends because they were from out of town, and I let them know that she was going out with me. We were engaged the second year, I believe, that we were dating. So we got engaged because what attracted me to Debbie was she's beautiful. She was the prettiest girl I knew, but she was also the kindest person I knew. And I was just a nerd. I was just a nerdball. And when I needed good advice for an 18 or a 19-year-old, Debbie just always seemed to be able to say the right words to me that just struck such a chord that I loved spending all my time with her. And we spent a lot of time together. And a lot of the time was fun because we were just kissing all the time. And that was a thrill for me too. So now it's time to get married, and I never wanted to forget this day. So I thought, why not get married on my birthday? So Debbie and I were married June 12th, 1977 at B'nai Israel Synagogue in Rockville, Maryland. And it was a beautiful day. And I remember when we came out, the car had been decorated because they did that in the days, and it started raining a little bit. And Debbie's mom, Helen, said, it's a blessing when there's a little rain on your wedding day. We drove over to the Marriott, which is still there today, next to Dulles International Airport, and we were flying to San Francisco and ultimately to Hawaii. While we were in Hawaii on our honeymoon in 1977, they were shooting the #1 TV show during that year, Charlie's Angels. And I remember 3 actresses, Jacqueline Smith, Kate Jackson, and Cheryl Ladd. And it was fun to watch them, but a little boring. But I got up the nerve to go into their tent, and I took a picture with Jacqueline Smith, and Debbie was not exactly happy that I had my arms and my hand on another woman during our honeymoon. So she took the picture, but kept her finger on the camera and cut Jacqueline Smith out. So after the honeymoon, we moved to our first apartment together, Quince Orchard Apartments in Gaithersburg, Maryland. I was working for the Federal Home Loan Bank Board. This is 1977. Debbie was working as a school teacher for Montgomery County Schools. We moved from Quince Orchard Apartments to Gold Kettle Court Townhouse in Shady Grove. When we were living in the townhouse on Gold Kettle Court, Debbie became pregnant, and the reason we moved to North Farm was my mom had passed away from a heart attack, and I got it in my head that I couldn't raise a family in a townhouse. So we moved to a 4-bedroom house in Rockville. The price was $139,500, and we didn't know how we would afford it. We managed to. Today in 2022, that house is now $1,250,000. In North Farm, Tracy was born in 1980, named for my mom, Teresa. Abigail was born in 1981, and Nathan was born in 1982. We then moved to 11618 Twining Lane in Potomac, Maryland in 1986, which is where we still live today, Debbie and I. And it has been a wonderful experience. A number of neighbors are still our friends in the neighborhood. My brother Bruce and sister-in-law Robin live 4 doors down. And it has just been a wonderful life growing up in areas called Elberon in Potomac, Maryland. I could not have asked for anything better. My career took me from the Federal Home Loan Bank Board, which I left shortly after my mom passed away, and I went to work with Debbie's family. Her father, Lou Vanderoff, her uncle, Stanford Steppa, and her brother-in-law, Mark Polsky, operated a grocery company called Magruder's. And there was 3 stores at the time, and I went there on the weekends while I was still working at the Federal Home Loan Bank Board and just helped on Saturday. And maybe because I majored in marketing, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I decided I was going to ask her dad for a job. At the Federal Home Loan Bank Board, I was making $9,800 a year. Debbie was making about $1,000 a year more than me. And I met with my father-in-law, and he said, "We're growing, we'd love to have you in the business, but you're going to start at the bottom." Truth be told, I was given a raise. I went from $9,800 to $10,000. My first job with Magruder's, I was making $10,000 a year, and Debbie was still making more than me. I worked 6 days a week. The store was opened at 8 a.m. in the morning. We closed early at 7, and we were off on Sundays. And I worked at the store at Chevy Chase Circle on Connecticut Avenue. The assistant manager was an elderly gentleman who retired. The store manager then retired, and before I knew it, I was running the store. From the Magruder's on Chevy Chase, we had a store in Rockville, Congressional Plaza. And my Uncle Stanford came to me one day, 2 years after I had been working in the grocery business, said, "We want you to go run the store in Rockville." The store in Chevy Chase was about 6,000 square feet. That's 6,000, not 60. The Magruder's in Rockville was 23,000 square feet. I didn't think I was ready. My uncle said, "Just go there and do it." My career at Magruder's spanned 35 years. I went from opening and managing a number of stores. We grew from 8 stores to 16 stores, basically overnight when we bought another company in 1986. And we became unionized. And when you talk about bad things that happen in life, a bad business decision was to buy a competitor who was unionized, and we were not unionized. And although we survived for 30-something years, and we grew the business, it was very difficult to have a union operation that we didn't have control over expenses. We could not control the pension, we could not control health insurance, and we felt in 2013 it was best to sell the business and sell stores back to landlords and to get out of business. We announced a 50% off sale, not knowing how long it would take, and at that point, I believe we had 7 stores. We sold out our entire inventory in less than 48 hours, including signs that were in the store, bags, anything that said Magruder's on it, people wanted to buy because of the tradition being in the Washington, D.C. area for over 100 years. It was the most amazing going out of business sale that I think anybody's ever been involved in. I mentioned my mom died, and she was only 63. My dad died, he was only 69. So unfortunately, being married and having 3 kids and growing them up, I didn't have parents to ask parental advice, but what I did have was Debbie's parents, Lou and Helen, who became my second parents. A tradition that my family had from the age of 5 and growing up was we would always go to the Washington Redskins games. And we had 12 tickets, and our family would go, my dad, my siblings, and my mom didn't really go to the games. But we would go to RFK Stadium, and then when they moved to FedEx, we were big supporters of the Washington Redskins, now the Washington Commodores. And I went to 3, maybe 4 Super Bowls. And our first Super Bowl we went to was in California. And I was sitting next to the actress Goldie Hawn. And the Redskins won the game. But in the first half, every time we scored a touchdown, Goldie Hawn was with her 2 little children. Goldie and I would hug, and maybe a little kiss on the cheek. That wasn't acceptable to my brother Bruce and Alan, because at halftime, they made me change my seat. During future years, when the Washington Nationals played baseball here, we went to a lot of baseball games, and Washington eventually won the World Series. We were at the playoff games in Washington, and my son Nathan and nephews flew to Game 7 in Houston, which they won, and they were able to literally party with the team in the hotel the night they won the World Series. Growing up as a child, my dad was always bringing dogs home from his junkyard. One dog named Lucky became our Little League baseball mascot and was the only dog that was allowed on the baseball fields in Montgomery County. Another dog that I had during college days was a big German Shepherd named Nero. Also, my father brought home from the junkyard. When I went to college, my mother decided she was done with the dogs, and the dog had to go. I stepped in and brought Nero to the University of Maryland, and he stayed in my room for 2 weeks, went to classes with me, till the RA said, the dog's gotta go home. My final pet, who I've had for 13 years, who's been sitting in my lap, is Charlie Checkers. Debbie's first pet, and this dog has been a lifesaver for me. He was my emotional support animal after Magruder's closed, because he got me out walking around the neighborhood and allowed me to talk to all my neighbors, which got me to my final job, which is real estate sales with Compass Real Estate. My legacy is what Debbie and I have created in the way of family. We have 3 beautiful children, and we have 7 grandchildren. Tracy is the oldest, married to Eric Lynn, living in St. Petersburg. Their children are Hazel, Jaron, and Riley. Abigail is the middle child, living in Bethesda with Kellen and Brody. Nathan is married to Becca. They live in Potomac, Maryland. Devin and Zachary are their children. And they spend a lot of time at our house in the pool. We go to St. Petersburg to visit. And I think some of our happiest times to bring our vacations back into play is when we all go to Ocean City, Maryland, and we all spend a week together. There is nothing better than that in the entire world. Now that I'm older in life, it's nice to give a little bit of advice. So what I would like to leave everybody with is, number 1, family is the most important thing in this world. More important than what your job is. And the second most important bit of advice I could give anybody is what Debbie has taught me, is to always listen, listen, and listen if you want to have a successful marriage and a successful life.